Thank you. It is quite clear in terms of what we're doing, why we're doing it, not just in terms of the job that we're doing, but the godly perspective of it. So that's a place that we have that's called daylight. If he, God forbid, is struggling to allow his soul to express itself, he is in nighttime circumstance. He's in darkness. If when we sleep at night, the soul recedes from the body. When God returns it to us refreshed in the morning, we express our thanks to God through the prayers of Modeh and Elokai Neshama. So Modeh, of course, is expressing thanks to God for returning my soul within me, and that's said immediately upon awakening in the morning. And the Elokai Neshama is a kind of a broader expression of the idea of saying Elokai Neshama Shanatata Bi, the soul that you gave me within me, you created it, you blew it into me, you gave me the soul, and at some point you will take it from me, etc. So it's a little bit more of an expanded idea of talking about the soul. We say Modeh right away because at that point we have not washed our hands, and so therefore we're not pure to be able to say God's name. And then we later, after washing our hands and saying brachot, we begin saying, mentioning God's name, and so therefore we expand the idea further. Regarding this process, the prophet says, the prophet Ishaya cries out, "O cease to glorify man who has only a breath or soul in his nose. For what is he worth?" So the term he uses sheneshama be'apo. Neshama, of course, means both a breath, neshima. And so he's saying basically, why would you praise man? Because a man is basically just an air-filled bag, or only as the soul in his nose as well. Ki bameh nechshav hu. For what is he worth? And so the Rebbe explains that the deeper meaning of this verse is as following. During the night, we have become so physical that only a fraction of the soul's power remains in the body. Therefore, the verse uses the term, the soul is in his nose. Okay? In other words, the soul is not expressed through your heart. The soul is not being expressed through your mind. When a person is asleep, all of their powers, all of their capabilities are in a latent state, and they're not using them. And even if a person, let's say, is sleepwalking or something like that, they're not doing it in a conscious manner. And even when a person is dreaming, that certainly is not something that is conscious. Dreams, of course, are the vast majorities of dreams are completely and absolutely meaningless, and they're certainly not thought through. And even meaningful dreams, the Talmud says about them that even Joseph's dreams had nonsense along with them. Go ahead, Robert. Robert, you have a question?
No, I'm okay. Thank you, Rabbi.
Robert?
Yes. No, I don't have any questions.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Sure.
Okay.
There we go. So a person is not, their soul is not expressing itself through the person, even their animal soul, so to speak, is asleep, is latent, is not being expressing it through a person's higher faculties. And he says this state still exists within somebody prior to prayer, meaning that the person remains in an incomplete coarse state. So until a person has prayed, a person remains in that spirit of darkness, of physicality, and of basically an animalistic state of earthiness, of coarseness. Therefore, the prophet tells us to cease or separate ourselves from such a state, which is called man. I'm trying to remember the beginning of that verse. Come on. Chadal, if I remember correctly, is the correct word. I'll have to look it up later. Sorry about that. But the final words of the verse for what is he worth, Bamen nechshavhu, can also be read as Bama nechshavhu, that he's considered a Bama, a temporary altar. So at this point where a person has not worked and done their side of the equation, in other words, God's given them access, but they have not allowed themselves to access that which they've been given, they're considered a bama, they're considered a temporary altar. And he explains, just as an altar rises high above its surroundings, so too his ego, which is associated with the body, has precedence in terms of his existence. In other words, he's completely focused on himself at that point, and in order to leave this state, he must pray. He needs to connect himself to something higher than himself. The word tefillah, prayer, also means connection. Like we said, tofel. Prayer elevates the person so that he can continue through the rest of his day and make it godly. In other Hasidic texts, it talks about the fact that we have this responsibility of refining the world. It's referred to in the world as tikkun olam, but it's not at all the social connotations of tikkun olam at all. The idea is that the world, of course, is physical, and our job is to make it godly. So, for example, when you take a cow, it's just an animal. You slaughter it properly, and then you use the meat for kosher food, and you make a blessing on the meat, and you take the skin and you make the skin into parchment for a mezuzot or a Torah scroll or tefillin or something like that. That cow is no longer just a physical creature, and now it's become a godly creature. And everything that the cow has done over the course of its life has now become godly, because all of those things have been elevated through its use for something much greater than itself. That same concept is also applicable to our livelihood. And when we work, let's say if we're working as a mechanic or something, we have the ability to be able to elevate everything that we do through taking a portion of what we've earned and giving it to tzedakah. We have the ability to be able to elevate our work through using our work in a godly fashion, whether that means by representing holiness and godliness, by living an honest life, by doing favors with our skills for other people, whatever the case may be. But it's not just about going through life and accomplishing what needs to be done, but it's about elevating the things and the circumstances that we've been given. And then, of course, we have our own self, our own characteristics, our own intellectual capabilities, and all those things need to be elevated as well. But a person can only do this through prayer first. You don't have the ability to be able to refine your world unless you have given yourself to God first, unless you've created this connection. Refine the world if you have not begun by making this connection. And this connection, as we're going to see, needs to be done in such a way that a person puts themselves aside. For this to happen, one must begin with humility. As the analogies of a teacher, student, father, son illustrate, the same process occurs daily when God restores the soul, which in turn engenders gratitude and humility. So the idea of gratitude that Susan brought up before is not just one nice little thing, but it gives a person the recognition as to what's what in his world, and that itself allows the person access to this greater capability of refining the world. This enables the close relationship to exist between the giver, God, and the receiver, the Jew praying. So the previous rabbi concludes, with this we can explain the opening statement, Lecha Dodi Lekrat Kala, come my beloved to greet the bride. This is the process of the giver coming close to the recipient. And through this, the verse continues, Pnei Shabbat Nekabla, we will greet the face of Shabbat. The face of Shabbat refers to an internal level that is now being revealed. The internal level refers to the blessings that Shabbat bestows upon the following week. So what happens is God gives us access. And by that access, we are able to reveal the internal purpose of the entire world at large. Ben, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wondered which chapter are we studying today from the print?
This is chapter 3. So this is just
Okay.
concluding chapter 3 right now.
Thank you.
So we see this process of the giver giving, the receiver receiving, and the receiver creating something that is greater than themselves, and in fact, greater than both of them together as a result of that. The same way, of course, a husband and wife unite to be able to create a child, which is a new life, which is something outside of both of them. It's a new revelation beyond what either of them are able to accomplish by themselves. And that's accomplished, of course, through the feminine receiving. That's that's referred to as Pnei Shabbat. Pnei Shabbat not just means the face of Shabbat, but also means the internal aspect. There's something new, there's something hidden that was drawn out as a result. Likewise, through the process of teaching, the teacher gains more from his students than they receive from him. In the process of teaching, it's not just the teacher going downwards in a one-way direction. The teacher gains himself. So too, a wife of valor is a crown of her husband. She likewise brings him to spiritual heights that he could not achieve alone. And likewise, with regards to us as the Jewish people, we give God something that God does not do himself. God created a physical world. It is our job to make it godly, and that's specifically done by accessing the godliness that God granted us the ability to be able to tap into. So this concludes the Mimer, the Rebbe's wedding. And in the Rebbe's Mimer, the Rebbe's really going to break it down for us much more. Here, the focus very much on the giver aspect. And in the previous Rebbe's Mimer, we're going to see an expansion of that to understand the dimensions much deeper. Go ahead, Ben.
I want to say that the translation of Pnei Shabbat Nekabla, the simple translation is we will be welcoming the Shabbat coming in with a smile, with a face that is happy, with happiness.
Right. We are translating it in a way that we are pulling out each and every word into its most simple meaning, its most literal meaning, and then opening up the idea further. So that's very much what we're doing here. And to understand the idea with regards to Shabbat, again, we explained before that when the Talmud says that when a person works before Shabbat, you can eat on Shabbat. Mishachal be'erev Shabbat, mishatarach be'erev Shabbat, yochal b'Shabbat. That through the effort that one puts in the weekday, that way you'll be able to have a beautiful Shabbos day. But it's not that simple. The idea is much deeper. The idea is through the refinement of the world that one does during the weekday, they're able to live in elevated place on Shabbat. And as a result of that, Shabbat itself blesses the coming week. And that's the reason why it says about Shabbat, Minei mitbarchen kula yomim. From Shabbat, all days are blessed. So which one is it? Is it that Shabbat receives or Shabbat gives? But within this framework, we now understand. Lecha Dodi likrat kala. Yes, we give to Shabbat, but as a result of what Shabbat is, it in turn gives to the coming week something on a completely different, on a quantum level, it gives a quantum leap forward, so that our next week is even more elevated and even more godly. So Rabbi Smith will send out the next mimer, in which we're really going to break this mimer down into its deeper elements, but not just into its deeper elements, but we're going to explore the world of the relationship on a much more practical side, as well as on a more godly side. So I'm looking forward to doing that with you, God willing, this Friday. Anybody have any questions before we go?
We already received the 5, 6, and maybe 7. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah, up to 7. Yeah.
Good. We will see you next